Neuroticism. So you scored 74th.
Yeah, I was probably still pretty sick when I took this test.
And I've done this a number of times throughout my life. I know it says clearly on the website, you can only take this once, which is terrible marketing.
Yeah, I don't think that's true either.
I don't think it's true.
You go through life changes, you can do it again.
Right, but there should be a gap between the times you take it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you can't just repeatedly take it till you end up with the personality you don't have, but you want. Yeah, for sure.
Well, that's really why we built that caution in there.
Let's just say just don't cheat. If you just repeatedly answer the questions honestly, because I did this when I was young and it was pretty much the same, but when my depression went away, my neuroticism plummeted. So the withdrawal aspect too, but also the volatility went way down.
Depression is a modulation of your neuroticism in some sense. And so it's always been difficult for me to answer the neuroticism questions because when I'm healthy, I'm low in withdrawal and I'm low in volatility. But when I'm unhealthy, well, both of that mounts up. And so then the question is, because I've had some repeated bouts of depression, the question is, well, who are you? And the answer is, well, it depends on whether or not I'm depressed.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to answer.
But I think, and this is, you can tell me if this comment is wrong, but I think people can get along with a variety of different personality traits, right? But if you have two neurotic people, I'd just try and find, I remember seeing my score and my score in neuroticism was like 90 something. I was like, okay, there's certain personality traits I want in a mate, but I definitely can't be with another neurotic person.
Well, women initiate about 75% of divorces. And there are multiple reasons for that. What one reason is that women are higher in trait neuroticism. They're more sensitive to negative emotion. So they feel more units of negative emotion subjectively per unit of stress. That's a way of thinking about it. And so they get unhappy faster. Now, why is that? Well, the jury's out on that, but some possible reasons. It seems to kick in at puberty because it's not true for boys and girls. They're smaller. Their upper bodies aren't as strong. They're not likely to win physical contests, especially with men, especially with tough men, despite the Marvel movies. And so the world is more dangerous for them in some sense physically, but I think more importantly is the fact that they are going to bear primary responsibility for dependent infants. And if you have an infant depending on you, you should react to the world as if it's more dangerous than you might if it was just you navigating through it. So now the downside of that for the people who have to live with women and for women themselves is that they're more likely to get upset. They're more likely to make a big deal out of something. Statistically speaking, there's plenty of men who are more neurotic than plenty of women, but on average, that's the case.
That's just the worst. I'm just going to put it out there. That is the most.
Yeah, well, it's useful for men to understand this, because women.
I got Mom.
Oh, Michaela. That's extroversion. Talking away and then realizing what she's saying.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Did you know, side note, shying away from this, have you heard of the vasopressin and oxytocin for bonding, which is really interesting? So vasopressin is released when there's stress. And men tend to bond when that chemical is released. So which isn't that interesting? So you can stress out a man in a situation and that'll increase bonding.
Reconciliation.
Bonding, yeah.
It seems to.
But for women, it's oxytocin that's really involved with bonding. So what you want to do for a woman is make her feel safe.
Yes.
So it's interesting. Isn't that interesting? They did a bunch of studies on voles too, shot them full of oxytocin and vasopressin to see what happened.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
But that's so cool. So you can be more neurotic. You can get away with being more neurotic as a woman if you're with a man who's more stable. And potentially, according to voles, that might even increase bonding if the man can take away some of the woman's kind of problems and make her feel calmer.
Yeah, well, I think that's highly likely, highly probable that. Yeah. And so I think when I'm healthy, I'm low in withdrawal and a little higher in volatility, but low in withdrawal because I don't.
You're not as low as me, though.
Fear doesn't stop me from doing things.
Yeah, so this, I would say when you did this, because you scored 80th, and that's just not true, because you wouldn't do a world tour and meet all these people if that was the case. You just stay at home, right? You scored 3rd.
Yes, I have no withdrawal. So we're a little bit, the sex differences here are turned around.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's yeah. Well,
And so that means that when we have a disagreement for whatever it is caused by my need for safety being a woman and your need for being having some sort of reconciliation is kind of backwards.
Yeah, well, your mom has a relatively masculine temperament because she's low in
too.
agreeableness and low in neuroticism. And I have a relatively feminine temperament, especially when I'm
Yes.
depressed. And so, and that's it's interesting to consider that in light of this cultural argument about sex and gender. Well, there's two sexes, let's be clear about that. And there has been for several 100 million years. So there's actually no dispute about that. But there's a lot of variability, even biological variability at the temperamental level.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's plenty of
Yeah.
masculine women and feminine men, but that doesn't mean they should switch bodies. That's actually the wrong solution to that problem. So, and that can be true even though on average women are higher in negative emotion and higher in agreeableness.
Okay.
Oh yeah, so neuroticism. I mean, the one of the problems there is that people who are higher in negative emotion and neuroticism will tend, at least from the perspective of those lower, to make mountains out of molehills. And so it's
Yes.
a problem that
Yeah.
you deal with in clinical practice a lot, especially with people who are depressed, because any failure makes them think they're a horrible, unworthy person and that their life isn't worth living. And that's too much of a reaction to every problem. And so part of the way you bind that is you try to make the discussion about the smallest thing it can possibly be about. And I think that's a good guide to political discussion as well.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's not climate,
Local.
local, specific, practical, actionable, negotiable, articulable. Yeah.
It's not
Articulatable?
Yeah.
I think it's articulable,
That
but maybe
Okay.
it's neither.
that's not a good word to
It's
screw
not-
up.
It isn't. No, it's not. It's a stupid word to screw up.
I don't
yeah.
know if that's a
Right.
word.
Articulable.
Clearly spoken.
Okay, that's
There.
better.
See, the impolite person corrected me.
Dad's right.
But you can also see.
Artic-
Oh, he is, huh?
Articulable.
Articulable.
Huh.
Yeah.
I don't know that word.
Yeah, so
Well,
there are girlies.
We learned
Yeah.
we learned something.
Yeah.
Successful podcast.
Well, that's me in enthusiasm. Asking,
Yeah.
that doesn't make sense. Tell me
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
Or low and polite.
Well, that's that provocative part too. That's linked to a sense of humor. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Most comedians are low in politeness, high in compassion, though they may still be. They're low in politeness because they'll say things